Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1228 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you on a Monday evening into Tuesday. And thank you for joining us, as always, on the podcast. Making Locked On Hawks your first listen each and every day. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcast platforms. Today's show will be myself and Glen Willis of Peachtree Hoops, who was kind enough to join me for a conversation on Monday afternoon about all of what transpired in Game 4 for the Hawks, the entire first 4 games for the Hawks, really, and then also some adjustments potentially for Game 5, observations, takeaways, analysis. All of that is there with myself and Glen. Glen is very smart. We'll talk about all kinds of stuff on that podcast coming up. Before that, though, the injury reports are now out. I recorded with Glen a little bit earlier in the day on Monday than usual, so the injury reports, we did not know those at the time of the recording. No huge shocks along the way here, but a couple guys are questionable for the Hawks officially as of Monday for Game 5. Capella is still questionable with the knee injury, in which he came back in Game 4. And Bogdanovich, after being off the injury report for a while now, is back on the injury report with right knee soreness. I'm not sure what that actually entails. No other details available for the Hawks at this point in time, but he had some dead legs, according to McMillan, in Game 4, so we'll see if he's able to play through it. I would guess he probably does at this stage, but nothing is assured. Anyone listed as questionable at this stage, and Lou Williams is still out for the Hawks. He's not played in quite some time at this point. On Miami side, Kyle Lowry is officially out for Game 5. He missed, of course, Game 4 in the fourth quarter of Game 3, which we'll actually talk about a little bit later on with myself and Glen. So that's the only notable change for the Heat. Our friends at BetOnline make the Hawks 7.5-point underdogs in Game 5. That is very similar to the numbers that were in place for both Game 1 and Game 2, where the Hawks lost in Miami. So we'll see if they're able to have more resistance in this spot, but no huge surprise there. The Hawks will be underdogs, barring a miracle at tip-off, and we'll see if they're able to overcome that and get a win to keep the series alive. Regardless, though, we'll have our full show after the game on Tuesday evening into Wednesday, breaking down everything from Game 5, and if the Hawks win, we'll have more in advance of Game 6. If the Hawks lose, we'll still be here with off-season content, some player reviews, all that fun stuff is on the way whenever the Hawks season ends, whether it be now or later. So please subscribe to the podcast. And without further delay, you'll hear the intro, and then I'll be back with myself and Glen Willis.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
I am joined now by friend of the podcast and friend of me, Glen Willis of Peachtree Hoops is here. Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm good today, Brad. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm okay. Obviously better than the Hawks in the wake of Game 4. As I said before, we're recording this Monday afternoon, so kind of in the middle portion of the, the Hawks are traveling today down to Miami for the must-win Game 5. I have lots of stuff to ask you on the show, but I want to start here with a very open-ended question. What in the world happened to the offense in Game 4? I know you have more insight than I do, so I'm just going to leave it just like that for now, and we'll dive in from there.
I'm still not quite sure what I was watching in Game 4. It was such a strange experience. To start, the first quarter I thought went fine. I think everyone was feeling pretty good about things at the end of the first quarter. It was like a 1 or 2 point game. I can't remember exactly which way it went. But with Clint and they were getting shots in the corners, Miami was still prioritizing cutting off things to the rim, and they've been excellent at that the whole series long. But DeAndre hit a couple of threes. I think Gallo got one, and JC got one in there, and it felt like, maybe they're going to actually force Miami to kind of come out of that aggressive tagging and double tagging they were doing on Clint and such. But nothing really ever materialized. They kept doing that, and the Hawks couldn't get to the rim, and then eventually I think Miami just started working harder on their closeouts. One funny thing is that with the Heat missing Lowry, I actually think that benefited them on defense in some ways yesterday. They had bigger defenders closing out on shooters, and in the second half of Game 3, up until Lowry without the injury, the Hawks were really targeting him. And so I still can't get my head around seeing Trae not be aggressive and not attack. And I put out a tweet after the game, like just saying how weird that was. And, I don't know anything, but it makes me wonder, did that slip he had with Vincent, I think, was that pretty rough, or did he come into this game, with kind of the ankle issue being a bad day with the ankle as opposed to where maybe, so I don't know what's going on offensively, but I want to give Miami credit for how, they're one of the best defensive teams in the league. There's no doubt about that. And they are absolutely giving the Hawks nothing at the rim, which is kind of the foundation for everything the Hawks want to do. But I'm surprised, the Hawks are, an excellent 3-point shooting team. They have one of the best creators in the league. And yesterday was the day I felt like, man, they just can't do anything with Miami's defense right now. I wish I had a better answer for you, but that's all I got right now, I think.
No, it's true. And schematically, they've tried some stuff. I think 2 of Trae's buckets in the game were like kind of working off ball and almost in catch and shoots, which he hasn't done a ton of, and it was kind of effective at times. But the squishing schemes that they've been able to run against the Hawks have flummoxed them. That's not a secret by any means. And you said it, like the lack of rim pressure. And that's one of the things about this team overall is that they only really have the one guy that can get downhill. And if he can't do it, then they have some issues for the most part if Trae's not getting into the paint. And really, it was alarming, to your point, how little he got into the paint and got past the first line. He was pretty passive. Like you said, it might be an ankle issue, might be whatever's going on there, but there was some settling there. And I said this last night on the show, but sometimes Trae earns criticism for taking some bad shots. Sometimes he's over aggressive taking some shots. I would have preferred to see that versus what we saw in game 4. Like, at least if he's taking too many shots and some bad ones, he can make them. Whereas in game 4, he just kind of was out there and kind of floating and didn't do a whole lot to be aggressive. I'm going to ask you about him too in particular, but your point about Lowry is an interesting one that I want to just touch on real quickly, because obviously Lowry's been a great player for a long time and defensively he's super smart, but he's not the quickest guy in the world at this point. He's pretty slow-footed for a guard in particular. And on the one hand, his absence makes Miami play some lineups that aren't going to be great defensively. Like we saw them go in particular to Robinson and Hero together when Trae left the floor, which was smart, I thought, from Miami. If you're going to do that, that's the time to do it. But like Gabe Vincent is good defensively. So I have some more Gabe Vincent, more burst that way, and more sort of twitch might be good for them overall. Lowry's still a great help guy and stuff. And like, he's really got, he knows what he's doing, which is obviously something that's really kind of underrated sometimes. But I kind of agree with you that on paper, it might not seem like Miami would be better without Lowry, because it kind of seems just silly to me. But if you factor in Vincent being good and Oladipo, as much as he was kind of bad on offense in that game, he was playing hard on defense. Like, he's athletic and flies around. So if they're replacing a lot of his minutes with guys who are just better athletically, I think it might show up on film the way that you kind of described that.
Yeah, and I had kind of talked with Kevin a little bit about how he may be the best in the league. Like when you put him on someone in the corner and he has to kind of help cover that driving lane in that near side corner, he's really good at gapping that, right? And kind of zoning that area and stuff. He's awesome at that. But the Hawks started really kind of basically trying to post him, which for like the first game and part of the second game was pretty pointless, because the officials, he knows right where that line is, where officials are going to let him as a smaller guy kind of,
It's been a talking point in the series, some of that stuff for sure.
I mean, it's not, and I don't like to go straight to like that is dirty. I mean, he knows right where the line is, but smart veteran players understand that exactly, and he knows as a smaller guy, he's going to get away with more than, traditional big guy down there defending. But I think they kind of figured that out, and we're going right at him in the second half of game 3. And the Hawks really didn't have a matchup in the post that they could kind of take advantage of there. And that is kind of their outlet when kind of Trae can't get anything done. And when he's drawn PJ or Bam, more PJ more recently, whereas Bam in game 1 a lot. But they just didn't really have someone that they seemed to feel comfortable kind of going at down there. And I thought that was just put more pressure on Trae and allowed Miami to, if it's possible, to even kind of ratchet up even more of their defensive resources at Trae, right?
Yeah, which says a lot already. They've been doing that a lot already, so yeah.
Yeah, and then the other part is that, Miami, they, I think it was, I can't remember which analyst said, but they basically looked like they're in a 1-2-2. In game 2 or 3, one of the analysts said that, and with Trae's up front, that is exactly what it looks like. And when Trae has let's imagine before the Heat series, kind of draws a big man that he wants to attack, when he can't get past him, a lot of times he will kind of drive down, a step or two below the nail and use that elbow area as a step back. He does that to the left a lot. Mm-hmm. Well, the way that Miami's kind of setting up to contain that area is not available to him at all. So not only is he not able to kind of drive in the way that he would normally, Miami's also taking away his favorite mid-range spots with that technique too. And so, some Heat fans took issue with the fact how I kind of tweeted about it after the game. I was like, I'm talking about the Hawks here. I'm not talking about the Heat, good or bad. But the Heat are not giving him driving lanes, and they're not giving him any of the mid-range space that is, are his favorite spots at all. And it's sort of your classic, we're going to make someone else beat us. And Game 4 was kind of the blueprint outcome of what they've been working for in this series, for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's I think we've done. I know I have. I know you have gone out of our way to talk about how good Miami has been defensively, and they do deserve a ton of credit for it. Nate's done that. Even Trae, they've given the kudos to Miami, and obviously we focus on the Hawks. And I'm not gonna frame the whole podcast around Miami's defense, but like they have been remarkably good, which is certainly part of the story. The Hawks have not been great at countering, which we can get into too, but Miami's defense has been top notch for the majority of the series, which is certainly a huge factor. I'm going to ask you about Trae individually, which is, of course, kind of a big story after Game 4. Before we do that, though, a word from our sponsors on the podcast. Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. NBA fans looking for daily fantasy option this year, you can check out the award-winning app at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. I love it, and I know that you will too. It's so easy to use. For one thing, all you do is pick 2 to 5 players and an over-under on their projections, and you win up to 10 times any entry. Just you against the projected numbers, which makes it very easy, and you only need a minute or less to actually set your entry. It's just that easy and quick. PrizePicks is also safe and offers fast withdrawals, and they have props on almost anything you can think of, and that includes points and rebounds, assists, even steals. They have mixed sports entries as well. If you like soccer or baseball or MMA, etc., you can pair stuff together, use those skills at the same time. And for a limited time, PrizePicks has an exclusive offer for all of our users. It's an absolute no-brainer of an offer, and really, with that, you get $50 for free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores even a single point, but you have to use the promo code NBA to get the offer. That's right, exclusively offered to Locked On fans. If you sign up today, use the promo code NBA, $50 for free if a player in your first entry scores even a single point. Check it all out today at PrizePicks. All right, Glenn, it sort of goes with the offense hand in hand, clearly, because Trae's the head of the snake, as Nate always says. But, through 4 games, his numbers are pretty rough. 16 points a game, 35% shooting, 21% from 3. He has exactly as many assists as turnovers, which is really not what you want for a guy who averages almost 2.5 more assists per turnovers. Obviously, top 2 or 3 in the league in assists per game, number 1 in total assists, etc. And the crazy one for me is the on-off splits. With the fact that the Hawks have been sub 100 offensive rating with Trae on the floor and a 115 with him off the floor. That just never happens, ever. I mean, even when the Hawks have been better this year, as they have been this season with Trae off the floor at times, it's because the defense gets better. And the offense is always, almost without fail, worse when he leaves the floor. In this series, it's only 4 games, but they've not been able to score with him on the floor. And it's kind of part of that's him struggling. Part of that's the system as we talked about before. But what do you make of this? Because it's kind of spawned this separate conversation about whether he needs a number 2 guy. And we'll save some of that for later on, I'm sure, in the offseason. But, I mean, there's lots of talking points, but also part of the deal is that he's got to be better. Like individually, I think he's not been as good as he needs to be. I think that's not breaking news, but what's that calculus like? Is it just him struggling? Is it schematic stuff? Like where do you kind of see this falling?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about Miami's defense, so we'll kind of set that aside for a second. And your question is probably more the Trae side, so I'll address that. But for me, I think missing Capella has been absolutely massive. Agreed. I think he is I know people think like, oh, he's a terrible finisher.
He's not that. I mean, he has some bad ones sometimes, but he's really not that. He's not that bad.
But he puts so much pressure on the rim in the lob game. He's rough sometimes when he catches the ball and has to kind of regather and go back up. That's usually when his problems kind of show up there. But he really just puts so much pressure on the rim. And then in addition to that, JC hasn't been finishing at all. Now, part of that is Miami is just prioritizing bringing those defenders down and tagging really well for the most part. But even it feels like it's been 2 or 3 times JC has gotten the lob in that area. I don't think he's finished one.
Yeah, he's had 2 or 3 that were like very obviously plays he always finishes and always gets, and they're not there. It's sort of a good example. It doesn't tell the whole story, but those 2 guys not being themselves, it kind of, it takes away one of your main options. This is a pick and roll offense, and obviously it's harder to run pick and roll against this defense anyway. And then you throw in the fact that your 2 rim threats are just kind of not themselves.
Right, and then on top of that, all year long, typically Trae would have Capella or JC. And there were some minutes of this Okongwu and Gallo, but Gallo is one of the single best floor spacers at the 4 in the whole league, right? And gives you that space, in a different form and such. But it's had to be JC and Gallo to start up until Clint came back in Game 4. But I just think maybe Hawks fans that at least raise questions to me, and I talk with sometimes, maybe don't realize how critical it is for Trae to have ideally not only one but multiple elite rim threats. I mean, Capella has just a massive catch radius, and on top of that, he's so fast from the point of the screen to the rim. He's really quick in a straight line in that way. And JC has elite, kind of straight line speed as well. And I know when Hawks fans start, especially when they're frustrated, and there was a lot of frustration after Game 4, they start trying to kind of fast forward into, well, what might the roster look like last year? And I just say, be careful what you ask for, because if you are going to kind of shift things up around Trae and not have those guys who are excellent in the pick and roll, or put a ton of pressure on the rim, are quick from the point of the screen. I mean, Clint can set a screen at the logo and get to the rim in absolutely no time, which creates a real challenge for defenses to close that. And even yesterday, as much as Miami was prioritizing that, I still feel like a part of the struggle yesterday was just Trae and Clint not having a rhythm from the time that Clint missed, and such. So, when I will partake in kind of fast forwarding and imagining what the next roster might look like, I don't really want to get into that, kind of like your comment there, like until we get into the postseason. We'll do it later.
It's part of the fun. I mean, I get why people do it. It's like we do it offline. Like it happens. I'm not bothered by it, but This is in the middle of the season. I'm not going to spend 20 minutes talking about Donovan Mitchell. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. So it is what it is. But yeah, I'm kind of with you. Like, it's very easy to say, look, offense has been this team's strength this year, and they've been bad on offense in this series. And both those things are true. There is context. You talked about it. The fact that neither of their primary role guys have been themselves. We can sort of debate what percentage John Collins is. It's not 100%. We can sort of debate Capella's explosiveness. It's not 100%, obviously, in that one small sample size we saw in Game 4. And then Okongwu was awesome in down the stretch in Game 3 on both ends of the floor, but he's still a young guy, and he's not the same kind of threat in that way right now that those other guys are, especially in this setting. So when that club is maybe not out of the bag, but not quite what it normally is, and then you throw in the fact that this was always kind of one of the concerns against this offense, is that if you get a team that you're finally facing now that can switch and be extremely well coached, it is kind of one of the antidotes to what the Hawks do. It doesn't always work that way. We saw at the end of Game 3, they were able to score at will for a while, and Trae got off, and it was not foolproof, but this is the first time in this run that they've faced a defense like this. Obviously, Milwaukee is really good too. Philadelphia had strengths last year, but they were playing more drop. It wasn't quite the same thing. It's kind of like when Dedmon plays in the series, and he's not played that much at times. So It's interesting to me. Like, there's so many factors in play. Like Trae not being himself. Bogey he's been kind of a non-factor in 2 of the 4 games, and they just can't afford that. He's so important to what they do right now, particularly without the other guys down the stretch. And then everybody else, they're just kind of role players. I mean, when the shots go in for guys like Hunter and even Herter, the bench guys as well. DeLon has obviously been great in the series, but he's not a huge offensive threat all the time. So they and Gallo's, it's tough to play him sometimes because of his defense and et cetera. So it's perfect storm in a lot of ways. Like I know there's like sort of this rush to appropriate blame for what's going on, but it's so many different things from. Yeah, I think that the Hawks have the worst coach in the series. That's not like breaking news. Spoelstra's awesome. Their superstar has not been himself. They don't have the role threats. It's just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's all these things kind of coming into the middle. And yeah, we could spend 20 minutes talking about what's the biggest factor, but it's kind of everything. And we kind of also knew that if Trae wasn't just completely transcendent in the series, they were in trouble. And quite obviously, he has not been that so far.
Yeah, I mean, I know Hawks fans sometimes don't want us to sound like we're making excuses, but the Hawks don't have their team. I mean, it's just that they don't have their rotation. And it's funny because before the series, I was struggling with how I wanted to kind of predict the series, and eventually I guessed Heat in 7. I thought the Hawks would push them. It was hard to. We didn't really know what Capella's availability was. I didn't think we knew what
Collins
Collins, if he would make some progress each game and get closer. So it was a guess. But I don't think it's going 7. It just doesn't look. It doesn't look like the Hawks are going to be able to kind of win 2 straight against them. I'd love to be wrong about that. But the thing that has surprised me is that as good as Miami is on defense, they have a number of, and you kind of started to touch on this a few minutes ago, a number of defenders that I thought they'd be able to take advantage of. They're starting Strus. Hero comes off the bench,
Yep.
right?
Robinson.
And then you got Duncan Robinson, who basically didn't play in game 2 because of defensive.
I was going to say, I think that Spo knows he can't play him very much because of defense. I mean, Hero, they have to play. Like, I think he's not a good defender and he's even smaller, but he's at a sort of a line on the pecking order where he's going to be out there. But, and yeah, they do have some, I mean, that's one of the things about this team is like, they have some apparent weaknesses. It's just that they haven't been able to kind of get them exploited too much.
Yeah, and in this series, I think what's happened is, I imagine like, well, they're going to be able to get Trae on to Strus. Like in the 3rd and 4th game of the regular season, Trae like torched Strus, right?
Yep.
But what's happened in this series, as Spo has tightened the rotation and they've gotten more kind of detailed in their game planning, is basically Bam and PJ are covering up everything. Any other matchup, even if he draws Strus out, like PJ is lurking and Bam is lurking, and they're taking his space away. And Spo is basically, apart from twice that Bam has gotten into foul trouble, is for the most part kept Bam and PJ both on when Trae's been on, and won't really put Dedmon on until Trae comes off. And then even with the foul issue, which is really smart. And then in game 4, he rolled with PJ at center when Bam left in the 3rd quarter with foul trouble, as opposed to getting Dedmon on and it worked out great. So. Yep. I've been pushing on Twitter all along, like, man, I wish basically Nate would play Trae all of the Dedmon minutes, and then Spo ended up not playing Dedmon at all in the second half, in game 4. So Bam and PJ are all of the matchups I thought the Hawks would be able to use to be more competitive in this series, even not being sure what they get from Capella and JC. Bam and PJ are completely covering all of that up. And I didn't expect that. And that's where I feel like my prediction was a little bit too bullish on what the Hawks would be able to do with those matchups. And that's credit to Spo, his team, and those players.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we can pick on – I said something during the game. I think Bam's offense has been like kind of weirdly non-factory in this series, but his defense is just always what it is. He's a monster. And PJ, having that club in your bag where you can go PJ at center, and it's just huge. I mean, he's been awesome in the series. Not to go down that rabbit hole too much, but he's been a huge factor for Miami. Right. All right, I have a couple more things I want to get to, but before we do that, and this will be our final break on the podcast, a word from our sponsors on the show. Today's show is brought to you by BetOnline, and baseball is in full swing now. And of course, the playoffs are now here in full force in the NBA with a jam-packed slate of games almost every single night for the next couple of months. And with that in mind, BetOnline.net is the number one source for all of your sports betting needs and information this year. They have the latest odds, contests, futures, player props, exotics, and much more. And BetOnline is the best spot for all the latest developments in sports, including podcasts and reviews for all of the leagues this season. Not just basketball or baseball either. BetOnline has all that you want in the sports wagering space for information and every need you could possibly have, including live betting and favorite casino games that they also offer. And they have other sports as well. BetOnline has odds on golf, esports, tennis, auto racing, horse racing, MMA, boxing, hockey, soccer, cricket, entertainment bets, and much more. And the futures market's always open. Looking ahead to football season, conference titles, national titles, the NFL conference division winners, all that fun stuff. And of course, the big game looms always in the NFL world. So head to betonline.net right now on your computer or mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action across the sports world today. BetOnline, where the game starts. Glenn, we talked about the offense a ton. I will allow you, if you'd like to, add anything else that you want to on the offense. But I do want to get to the defense quickly. Because you and I are defensive nerds. We like defense. And on the surface, the Hawks defense has not been great in the series. They have been giving up like 118 points per 100 possessions, which is a bad number under any circumstances. I've kind of been saying I think the Hawks have been pretty decent, at least by their standards, defensively for a lot of this series. There have been some breakdowns for sure. Last night was kind of everything except for the shooting stuff, which I kind of ranted on a lot on the show. But like on a night where Miami didn't shoot well to score as well as they did, it was that they basically won every other category: offensive rebounding, turnovers, free throws, all this stuff. So like, what do you make of the defense? Because I know you and I are among the 1% of people that are like really diving in on the Hawks defense in this series. And a lot of the focus is obviously been on the offense for good reason, but I've been intrigued by what they've kind of done defensively.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like they've been pretty sound from the beginning of a possession. They've for the most part, kind of helped each other with cutters, and I feel like after game one, they started being a little less aggressive up as high as the screen, whether that's a ball screen or otherwise, and that helped them a lot. They trusted their guys like Delon, who's excellent working over screens, and Herter, who's been better as the series has gone along, kind of working over screens. And so I thought the adjustments coming out of game one were good. And even in game one, I thought they were pretty sound in a lot of areas. It's really in game four, it was about not turning Miami over. I don't think they had a single turnover in the first half. So they're not.
Yeah, it was the first time in franchise history, by the way, they didn't have a turnover in an entire half, which is crazy.
Yeah. And that sometimes that can be a statistical anomaly, but
Sure.
I think in this case it emphasized the Hawks are basically not generating any ball pressure, and in the way that Miami is playing a little bit conservatively and kind of prioritizing the paint. Since game one, the Hawks have been doing the same thing, keeping the big dropped, not getting them out there unless someone comes totally free off of the screen and things like that. And a part of that is kind of accepting you're not going to generate as much ball pressure. And the other part, which I know, you've talked about, is the rebounding. It has been just a major issue, and in game three, even with the win, I think 13 of Miami's 25 points in the fourth quarter were second chance points. Yesterday, they struggled to rebound the ball for stretches. And part of that is probably John's not the rebounder, he normally is. And DeAndre, as rough of a rebounding season he had, it feels like it's gotten worse in this series somehow.
I mean, he went 6 quarters without getting a rebound in the series.
Yeah. And that's hard. And then he had the first rebound he got yesterday. I joked that it was the one that bounced right at him, and I joked that the rebound basically attacked him and almost murdered him.
Yeah.
And I hate to pick when it comes to a team not rebounding. I hate to pick on guys, but you need more from your small forward especially when he's that big.
It's got to be collective. I mean, that's the thing. Like
right.
they've been so reliant on Capella for so long. And he's a freak. I mean, I think he's the best rebounder in the league. He's certainly on the list. He's up there, and he covers up for a lot of sins. But, defensively, they have lots of questions on personnel-wise. But one of them is certainly that, like, other than Collins and Capella, they don't have anybody anywhere that's a good rebounder. I mean, maybe you could say DeLon as a guard is a good rebounder because he is as a guard, but he's still a guard. And when you're forwards, I mean, Gallo is huge, and there are times when Gallo is okay as a rebounder. But when you're playing 40, not necessarily in this game, but there have been times in this playoff postseason run they played 48 minutes of either Hunter or Gallo at the 4. That's really bad at the 4. And then Okongwu is awesome at a lot of things, but not rebounding. So, I mean, that's part of the story. And just to sort of add to that, I'll go back to you. Miami has a 30% or so offensive rebound rate in the series, which isn't like horrific, but it's bad. I mean, that's above where they would normally be. And I think the numbers are even worse than that in certain lineups. So it's been a big problem.
And it is especially bad when you think about the fact that it's not like Miami's playing massive lineups. PJ Tucker's like 6'5", right?
Oh, they're playing small most of the time. Right. That's crazy. I mean,
and they put a lot of shooting on the floor, and it's not like they have like really freak athletic wings. You were talking about Hero and Robinson playing the 3 sometimes, and you'll see Martin out there, and so it's not like you're watching like when Toronto like has Pascal and OG at the 3 and the 4, they just kill you because they're both like massive, strong guys who are athletic. And that's not what the Heat are doing. So that 30% mark is pretty bad for the kind of line that Miami puts on the court. So that's been an issue, and it's just hard to pinpoint exactly what that is. But I think a lot of it for the series has been not enough at Capello, JC not being 100%. That's who they relied on all season long for their kind of better rebounding lineups and things like that. Yeah. And so once again, I'm just providing observations, not trying to make an excuse. They, Kevin and I talked a little bit about that and said they have to have 4 rebounders down there on every shot that Miami puts up. They have to have 4 rebounders down there. And the key to that is to not have multiple guys having to like X out 2 guys closing out on the perimeter, which leaves you at 3, and to stay intact. And it just felt like I didn't feel like I saw 4 guys consistently in game 4 getting down there. For whatever reason. So
no, I'm with you 100%. I mean, and it's some of that's personnel based. It's kind of like the thing with the turnover creation is that the Hawks have been bad at turnover creation for a long time. That's not anything new. Them not turning the ball over defensively is just a trait of this team. If you look at the roster, it's very obvious why. They don't have a lot of playmakers, quote unquote, defensively. It's even last year when they got hot defensively and they were like a top 12 team for a long time. It was basically Capella is out of his mind and they're just walling off the rim and they're filling and they're doing it that way. This is never going to be a team as constructed that's going to make a ton of steals and that kind of stuff. Like DeLon Wright, really the only guy you would describe as being above average as a like defensive playmaker that's playing for them right now. I mean, that's kind of the deal. But Miami, that's something I said a lot in the series. But the fact that the Hawks had more than double the turnovers of Miami in Game 4, like the Hawks are number 1 in the league in ball security. Like they could not afford to not take care of the ball in the series. And in Game 3, when they won, they took care of the ball. It's not 1-to-1, but they have to take care of the ball in the series, and part of that is implied that they don't turn the ball over defensively. So like if you're losing possessions by not creating turnovers defensively and not rebounding defensively, if Miami just doesn't shoot 30%, you're in trouble. And they didn't even shoot well. Again, they didn't shoot well in Game 4. If Miami shoots well in Game 4, you lose by 40. I mean, that's as bad as that was. I mean, they didn't have a good shooting game. So the fundamentals were just kind of wrong along the way there. And like, I don't know how you fix it. I mean, part of this end of this podcast, I'm going to ask you, like, what do you do differently on both ends of the floor if you have anything that you've observed in advance of Game 5? Because we can acknowledge, I mean, as much as I said yesterday, the series is not over because I'm someone that just never says it's over. Obviously some of the betting market stuff, and this is a 5% max 10% kind of endeavor where you got to win 3 games. So we are not silly. We're not being huge homers about this. We know the situation, but addressing it practically, like what can they do differently on offense and defense? I'm sure you have stuff banging around in your head, but what can Nate install? Like, obviously, we're not going to be outsmarting Nate McMillan as much as we make observations on our own. We know he knows more than we do, but like, what do they do now? I guess is the broad way to ask that question.
Yeah. I think what I'm looking for is no different than what I was looking for going into Game 4. And I've talked a bit about how in Game 3, one of the things the Hawks did I thought was really smart was to run a shooter to a corner and have basically Trae drive kind of right at that corner and put the pressure on the defender that is on that shooter in the corner to either help into the driving lane or stay on the on the shooter and make them kind of like a quarterback tries to make a safety make a decision sort of thing. And they basically, I don't think they did that one time in Game 4. And when I went back and rewatched, I was like, why did we not see any of that? And I thought I had a bit of an idea. But basically, when the Hawks did that best in Game 3, and especially in the second half, was when they're able to push the ball, and that requires that you rebound well or turn them over, right?
One of the two, yep.
And they didn't have any of that working for them. So, and in addition to that, so then I went back and looked at, okay, in the half court, why was there none of that? And with Lowry, the Heat haven't put Lowry onto Trae a whole lot in this series, but with Lowry out, they played Vincent on Trae a ton and had basically PJ and Butler on the corners, and those two guys are not going to play that wrong. They're going to gap it, they're going to zone it, they're going to time it, And so that's why when I went back and rewatched it, I was like, oh, this is why the Hawks didn't really kind of go to this. I mean, part of it is that Bogey is their best shooter in that scenario, and he had nothing working in Game 4. So
I mean, Nate mentioned just so I say it out loud. Nate said today at practice that he thought Bogey had heavy legs, is the way that he put it, and that's why he didn't play him more. I mean, objectively, I mentioned it, like he did not look good. I thought it might be an injury. Maybe it is one. They're not just saying, but like Bogey, just the way that we would describe it is that he had nothing, and that kind of it reminds you of how thin the margin is. But yeah, you're right. I mean, if he's not, and he's also the only guy who's super aggressive, other than Trae. He hunts his shot in a way that Hunter hunts mid-ranger sometimes, but like Herter is a good shooter, obviously, but he's not hunting the way that Bogey is. DeLon, same thing. Like they don't really do that. So like if there's not that guy to be the outlet for it, there's also nothing there too.
Yeah, and so there's the Miami keeping basically Butler and PJ in the corners, and then not having Bogey rolling and Trae knows when the guy's kind of got it going or not, and he'll adjust on the fly and things like that. So in terms of what I'm looking for in Game 5, I don't know that there's like an adjustment to make. I think it's put pressure on the rim as best you can with what you have. Open up those corners like they did in the first quarter. In Game 4, Collins, like we said earlier, Collins got one, Hunter got a couple, I think Gallo got one too. And try to make that work. You've got to hope Bogey's feeling better. You got to hope Trae feels a little better about kind of what he has going on, and then if you can find a way to rebound better, if you can find a way to generate a little bit more ball pressure and create that opportunity to push, like when Trae hit that game winner in game 3, I'm convinced if the Hawks had called timeout, or if it had been a rebound that didn't let them get kind of up the
They were
floor
already on the way.
quickly,
Yep.
then they probably don't score on that possession, and now the series is over by this point, right? And so they've got to do the things that give them those opportunities: ball pressure, rebounding, recognizing when you catch a long rebound, go push it, and those sorts of things. And they looked so sluggish yesterday, I think partly because they didn't look like they were feeling great physically, and we talked about that, but also they weren't creating any plays for themselves to kind of give themselves some energy and kind of get themselves moving. And I thought that just created, like, it was just too much of an uphill climb for that. So I'm still looking for the pressure on the rim, generate shots in the corner when they come way in and aggressively tag the guys you're rolling to the rim, but rebound, push, create turnovers as you can, push via ball pressure. I mean, frankly, I want to see DeLon play like 38 minutes, because he's digging and getting the passing lanes and helping generate the kind of offense that you need. So, it's kind of funny because it's Nate, but like, I think a lot of coaches would be like, I'm going to start DeLon and bring Herter off the bench this game.
It would not, I mean,
you're just,
if it wasn't Nate, I wouldn't be surprised. You know what I mean? Like, it would surprise me because it's Nate. And this is not a pick on Nate fest. Like, we're not going to do that. I think he gets a little bit too much blame sometimes. I also blame him for some stuff too. Like, I will tell you what I think. But I think a lot of coaches, to your point, would have changed a little bit more of what was going on, whether it was be play DeLon more or start Bogey, one of those two. Like, I think they would have done one of those things by now. Nate did go back to his traditional starting lineup for game 4. It did not particularly work, but if you look at what happened, it wasn't that lineup that got beat. Like, they were fine with that lineup. The starters were fine. It was when they started subbing a little bit. Obviously, the plus minus stuff was favoring certain guys in that game. But yeah, I do wonder, like, if there is any urgency, because even granted they were down 19, but like, he still came out to start the fourth quarter with their normal bench lineup, down 19 and playing for your season. And it's like, that's the criticism of Nate, which I think is sometimes warranted, is that he is stubborn and he does what he does. And we'll see if he changes that. As far as like other observations, like, I'm not the tactician that you are. I think we did see Trae have a couple of successful moments working off the ball, but of course that's like the chicken or the egg thing. Like, does Trae ever have that in him to do it more regularly? Because, it's not like a secret, but when Trae has catch and shoot opportunities, he shoots an incredible percentage, and those are really highly effective plays. It's just getting those opportunities, getting him off the ball. And it's also easier to have him off the ball if Bogey has it, because he's the one guy I think Trae definitely trusts. And I don't say trust in a negative way about anybody else, but and it sort of implicitly, Trae believes he's the guy that should have the ball in his hands, and he's usually right because he's awesome. But Bogey is the one guy that you kind of ever seen him defer to on the perimeter. Like, he'll do it with Bogey. He doesn't really do it with DeLon or DeAndre or even Kevin, aside from Game 7 in Philadelphia when Herter just had it going. But just interesting stuff. I mean, it might just be as simple as what you said. Like, maybe you just kind of need Trae and Bogey to be better than they've been. It's not just that easy, but they have to. One of them's got to have it, or you're done, basically. And that's not even breaking news. But if both of those guys play poorly, they just can't score.
Yeah, and I'm glad you suggested Trae off ball, because the other thing they did in Game 3 that popped into my mind until you said that was they were putting Trae into what they call their stack set. And if you're watching, you'll see, if you go on YouTube, stack 1 means Trae's going to go to the middle of the lane, get a screen from the center, and pop out to the right three-point break or the left three-point break, and start a pick and roll from there, and have a little bit of leverage and a little bit of a first step to work with there. He hit a three-pointer straight out of that in the second half of Game 3, and a couple of times he's gotten more freedom in the middle, like the foul he drew on PJ very late in the fourth quarter of Game 3 came from that stack 1 attacking the slot pick and roll from the right three-point break, I think it was. And we didn't really see, I don't remember really seeing that at all, yesterday. And I don't know why, because the corner seam attack worked well in Game 3. We talked about rebounding turnovers being what really feeds that well. In the half court, though, getting trained to that stack 1 slot attack was really effective in Game 3. Not sure why we didn't see that. Maybe because it was always Bam and PJ on the floor, even more so in Game 4. But that is another thing I think they can do. We saw this sideline out of bounds play that generated the one time where he set this back screen and then popped up for that three-point shot on the left. So, they've got to take advantage of every opportunity to kind of create those looks for him, I think. because he's having to work really, really hard for anything he gets, and anything they can do in those areas to kind of create a little bit more, moderate effort kind of opportunities, I think will be worthwhile. And again, it just we saw so little of that in Game 3. Game 4, heading into Game 5. I that's all I can really think of from a game planning perspective, is to go back to what's worked, and then remember, these are the things we're good at. We can't really stray that far from that. Putting pressure on the rim, diving in the pick and roll, opening up the corners, trusting Trae to make those passes. If they're going to win Game 5 and give themselves a chance to come back home, it's probably going to be the things that they're good at, doing more of it in some way. And that's really all I can see is the path.
Yeah, it's a good summation of it all. And I'll just be the practical person that just says, look, treating this game like it's your season is the way to do it as well. In some ways, like playing Trae as much as he can possibly play in Game 5, playing Bogey as much as he can possibly play in Game 5, like putting your best guys out there more. And it's not always as simple as that. I don't want to make it seem like it's that simple, but if there's a guy who just doesn't have, like if Gallo doesn't have it in the first half, maybe he doesn't play the second half. Like this is the kind of game where you have to kind of put your foot to the floor, especially on the road now. This is your season. It's that simple. And you ride the lamps that you need to ride. And if you got to play DeLon and Bogey a ton, and you can just do that and go small or whatever. But it will be a little bit, I think I'll be interested to see if there is that aggression level on rotations, if there is that kind of sort of switch to flip that just says, all right, this is it. Like we can't hold anything back now. Like Trae's coming back in after 2 minutes in the fourth quarter, and he plays 22 and a half minutes in the second half kind of thing. I don't know what's going to happen. And, obviously that doesn't help you if he doesn't have it either. So that's kind of the other thing, is that in this series, as crazy as this is going to sound again, they've been better without Trae, which is just wild. That never happens, but it's right. Been the case for 4 games. So, well, Glenn, add anything else that you'd like to. If not, thank you for all the time that you've given me here on a Monday afternoon. You are definitely accommodating me with this time, which I also appreciate as well. But thank you for doing this, and feel free to plug anything you like to plug, including that dreaded podcast that you co-host with Kevin Sharp.
Yeah. So on Twitter, if you want to find the kind of technical content at Willis_Glenn, 8tail29 podcast I do regularly with Kevin. We've been trying to do one after every game.
It's been great. I'll say that. Like, I am a listener. That show has been great. I know we are technically rivals, Kevin and I in particular, but I am enjoying those conversations, and I never want to. There is room for both of us, I'll say. So that's
I'll just say, I'm going to go into this game looking forward to it. I'm not a stressful, emotional watcher anyway, but you're
also an optimist, Glenn. You're also an optimist at heart.
Well, I believe in just being happy and not letting
that was a positive statement by me. I am not an optimist, and you are. So I appreciate the way you see the world usually. So
either they win and they get to come back home and see what happens, or they lose, and then we can all finally start to fast forward to the offseason, which is fun in its own way. So something good's gonna happen. And then I've been saying all along, if the Hawks lose, I want to see Philly and Miami play each other in the postseason, and so that's my consolation prize, I think.
Yeah.
If the Hawks lose, is that we get to watch that. So as you can tell, I'm in good spirits. I'm happy. However this rolls, there will be something good there for all of us, I think. And and if this doesn't go much further, then I'm excited to see what Travis and the rest do with the roster in the offseason, and we'll get there when we get there.
Yeah, we'll have plenty of time to talk about that. I know that is Andrew Kelly's Super Bowl. As soon as the season ends, it becomes a transaction season, and we'll touch on all of that stuff in the draft, and we'll get there when we get there. But thank you, Glenn. I do appreciate all the time. Game 5 will happen on Tuesday evening, and I think we'll both talk about it in certain forms. I'll be on this show. You'll probably be with Kevin shortly after that game, win or lose. So check that out. Follow Glenn. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see Glenn's Twitter handle, but it's at Willis_Glenn. Follow me if you'd like to at BT Roll, and follow the show at Locked On Hawks. And we'll see you all after Game 5.